Thank you, Dennis. My name is David G. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. I'm also a grateful recovering sexaholic. I have a sobriety date in both recovery programs, Alcoholics Anonymous of August 8th of 1994 and Sexaholics Anonymous October 1st of 2019. I'm really grateful to be here with you guys today. We've really been unveiling this big book for some weeks now. I think we talked the other day, it was like 14 or 15 weeks that we've been doing this. And we've been pretty thorough through the big book up to this point. We've been looking at the fourth step directions for the last few weeks. We've looked at resentments. We've looked at the fear inventory last week. And this week it brings us to sex, and that's why most of us are here. You know, I had done this part of the work in the inventory, I don't know how many different times. I was fortunate enough to work with Charlie of Joe and Charlie in the early days of my sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And Charlie was really good at taking you through the book and helping you to understand. All the knowledge that I ever acquired was not enough for me to stay sober whenever it came to lust. Now, I don't know why for more than 25 years I never realized that I was battling lust, not sex. I didn't realize that. I should have. I run around AA saying for a long time, if alcohol is your problem, just don't drink it. You shouldn't have a problem. But when you stop drinking it, then the problem shows up, the mental. So when I got here and you guys revealed to me that it was lust, not sex, that took on a whole new meaning in this inventory for me and the last time that I come back through this work. You know, there's a lot of folks on this call that have a lot of recovery time and sobriety time, and they've done all kinds of different 4 steps, and they've done a lot of 4-step work. They've done the sex inventory several times. So what I'm sharing here today is my experience. This is not the absolute way that anybody has to do this. This is the way that I've done this. And by the grace of God, I've been able to get free. And man, I'm so grateful for that. I'm more grateful than I could ever be for anything in my life that I've been free of lust. I had a spiritual experience early on in Alcoholics Anonymous about the first year in, and that spiritual experience changed my life. But lust returned about a year after that, and I've never been able to overcome lust. Never. So when we get to page 68, that's where the fear inventory ends, and that's where the sex inventory begins. Now, a lot of people, and myself included, through the years, and even with Charlie and Joe, they would send out worksheets, and we would check off, you know, was I selfish? We would check yes. Was I this? Was I that? We'd check yes. And that's all good information, and that's helped a lot of people. And I would never sit here today and talk bad about any of that. That just did not work for me. I've tried doing 5 columns in the inventory. I've tried doing a lot of different things. But the last time that I was brought through the work, there were some things that was revealed to me that I had never seen before in the inventory. And that's what I would like to share with you here today. We're not going to look at 5 columns of inventory. We're not going to look at checking any boxes. We want to look at what the book lays out as 11 columns to this inventory. Now, this is something that I'd never seen before, but it's very much right here in black and white. And so I think we'll just pick up right here on page 68 where it begins, and we'll go through this and we'll break it down as we have been all these weeks, and we'll take a close look at this inventory. If you've never done one, I thoroughly encourage you to get with a sponsor that can lead you through this book and up to this point and take you through this inventory. It's life-changing. Page 68, bottom paragraph, now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, and that's above everything else, we try to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Now, many of us know what overhauling the vehicle entails. We're going to break down the engine. We're going to tear it completely apart. We're going to replace things that went bad. We're going to overhaul the engine completely. And when we're finished, it's going to run pretty good. There's no doubt. But there are things that if I do not do once that engine is overhauled, it will not last. It will end up getting sick and going back, just the same as us. So we're going to have an overhauling here, but there's going to be some things required of us to do. And if we don't do that, then the overhauling will last for a little while, but it won't last forever. And that's what kept happening to me over and over. So when I came back again, I definitely needed another overhauling in this area. He says it's easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes. It's absurd extremes, perhaps. I even found this in the other fellowship that I attended for a long time. There were a lot of opinions that ran to extremes when it came to this area. It seems like they could talk about all other areas, but whenever it came to this was something that needed to be swept under the rug. They didn't really want to talk about any of that stuff. And I can understand that we don't go into meetings and we don't share fifth steps in this area, and we don't get into a lot of graphic detail. And I promise you, none of that's going to happen here today. But there is a set of instructions here, if followed very carefully, that will free us. Not only will we get sober in this area, we will begin to recover. We will wake up. The book says one set of voices cry that sex is the lust of our lower nature. Now, when I look at that word voices, I used to think of that as something outside of me, and it could mean that very well. But this time through, I'm going to take a look at those voices as if they're inside of me, because I have voices that cry all kinds of different things whenever it comes to lust and sexual acting out. One set of the voices cry that sex is a lust of the lower nature, a base necessity for procreation. We all know about that. But then I have voices inside of my head who cry for sex and for more sex. And that's definitely the voices that seem to overwhelm me all those years, who bewail the institution of marriage, guilty, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we don't have enough of it. That's definitely me. Or that it isn't the right kind. We see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. So in other words, the same partner is what he's talking about whenever it comes to the straight pepper diet. I didn't know that for a long time either. But here's the deal. We want to stay out of this controversy. It's really none of my business. I want to show you the directions on how to recover. I don't really care about all the rest of that. And when we get to step 5 and we look at the instructions there, it will tell us exactly why we want to stay out of this controversy. We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. I used to read that sentence, we all have sex problems, and I would look at normal people walking out on the street, and I'd think, I wonder if that person has it, or that person, or that person. The book says we all have them. And we'd hardly be human if we didn't. But what can we do about them? And that's the question that most of us come to whenever we get here. What can I do about this? The book says we're going to review our own conduct over the years past. And I can take this conduct inventory today. I can take sexual acting out and all of that stuff out of it. And I can use this pretty much as a basis for the conduct of how I handle myself in every one of my affairs today, not just in sex. Now, when I come through this work, I'm going to be looking at this with this in mind. But as I move forward, you can very much bet that I use this as a guide for my life today. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. In other words, I'm going to make a list of people, animals, vegetables, objects, etc. I'm going to get a list together. I'm going to ask God to guide me. I'm going to ask God to show me. I'm going to put a list together on a piece of paper, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to match it up against this right here. And I'm going to look at this in 11 columns, not 5. I'm not going to check off any blanks. I'm going to ask myself this question. Dennis, could you please put up the example so we can take a look at how this is going to look? Okay, here it is. Person, situation, thing, etc. First name is going to go right there under that. First column is going to be this. Where had I been selfish? What did I want? What was my goal here? I mean, what was I really after? And what I start to find out is my selfishness is always going to drive me to dishonesty, always. I'm going to become inconsiderate. I'm not going to care about you. A lot of people are going to be hurt by this. All these things that we're fixing to look at is what's going to end up happening. So my very first column, I'm going to want to fill this out in as much detail as I can. Where had I been selfish? Second column, where had I been dishonest? Did I lie? Did I cheat to get what I want? If I thought that I was going to get caught, did I threaten somebody? Did I threaten them not to tell anybody How was I dishonest in this situation? Did I lie to me, tell me I really wasn't hurting anybody, or I was sending messages I really wasn't acting out, so it really wasn't that big of a deal? How was I dishonest? I want to take a close look at that. Inconsiderate. Where had I been inconsiderate? Did I really care about you? Did I really care about what happened? Look at this next column. Whom had we hurt? Now, here's one I'm going to pay very close attention to, because before I would just put me and the other person. But I promise you that one act hurts a lot of people. Now, if I have had these kind of relations with a woman that is married, whether her husband knows it or not, his name needs to go on this list. If she has kids that has been neglected because of my taking her away and acting out with her, I'm going to put her kids. I had one gal that her parents was paying for her to go through college, and because of this type of acting out, she just spun off into all other directions, and she ended up quitting school. All that money was lost. Mom and dad's name went in here as well. This list is probably going to be pretty long. But not only looking at her family, let's look back at mine, my wife, my children, my grandchildren. I come home, I feel guilty, I feel shameful over what I've done. I get snappy, I get irritable, I get hateful. Yeah, a lot of people on my side were affected as well. So I'm going to get every one of these people's name down right here. Whom had we hurt? Not whom had we slept with. Whom had we hurt? Then we're going to look at, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy? Here's a yes or a no. But I really need to take a close look at how I did that. Suspicion, here's another column. Bitterness, there's another. So by now you can see that I begin to work my way down these columns. I've prayed prior to sitting down to do this writing. God has guided me, and I'm filling in these columns, and I'm going through these questions as thorough as I can. Where were we at fault? There's a big one. There's a big one. Where was I at fault? Well, there's a lot of things that imply my fault. It's not just that I seduced someone into sleeping with me or having sexual relations with me. I really need to take a close look at where I was at fault. The biggest place that I've ever found that I was fault is that I got spiritually lazy moving through these steps. I went back to sleep spiritually, and I ended up back in this over and over and over and over. What should we have done instead? There's something that I want to look at closely. What should I have done instead? There were many times I would be in meetings. I would maybe give too long of a hug. Maybe my conversation was geared in a way that it shouldn't have been to try to attract attention to me. What if I should have done instead? I should have stayed away from that situation. I should have never approached anybody after the meeting, especially a female. I should have never gave out my phone number. I should have never took down hers. We should have never became friends on Facebook. There's so many things that I should have done instead. I'm going to want to break this down very thoroughly. The book says this: we got this all down on paper and took a look at it. So that's 10 columns. So here's what I discovered. It says, in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound idea for a future sex life. Now, I would usually do that anytime that I would write an inventory, and I would come through this part of the book, and I would do it as best as I was showed how. Always at the end of it, I would write a sane and sound idea for my future sex life. I was never able to live up to it in the past through those 25 years of being in the other fellowship, but I would always write one. But whenever I start looking at the next few sentences real closely, it's going to show me another column that I'd never seen before. It says we subject each relation to this test, which would have been each name on this list. Was it selfish or not? I've already answered that question. I answered that in the very first question in this inventory. Here's my prayer. Here's what I'm going to do right now at this point. I'm going to ask God to mold my ideals, and look at the word ideal. It has an S on the end of it. So that leads me to believe that I need to take a look at this as my 11th column. If I had been spiritually fit during this time, would I have acted this way or would I have not? No, of course I would not. So if I could go back and I could look at a sane and sound idea for the future, if I'm in a situation similar to the one that I've just wrote about with that name, what would that be? What would that look like for me today? And I'm going to put that in my 11th column. Now, at the end of all of this work, I'm going to take and I'm going to make one big page or two, or how many ever it turns out to be, depending on however my prayers direct me. But I'm going to gather it from that 11th column. And that usually turns out to be a beautiful way to live my life moving forward. So it says, we ask God to mold our ideas and to help us to live up to them. I'm praying as I'm going through this work. Remember, there was no amen at the end of step 3. So we're very much still into prayer and action. A lot of prayer work given right here that we need to pay close attention to. I'd always skipped over the prayer work. I'd just done the work, moved away from the inventory, called my sponsor and said, okay, I'm ready to do this. I'm go to step 5. And he was like, no, did you do the prayer work or did you not? And I did not. So I come back. And so I'm going to ask God to mold my ideas and help me to live up to it. We remember always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly or to be despised or loathed. In other words, I'm not going to hate myself. I'm not going to beat myself up. But it's at this point that I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back and look at all the work I've done in those 11 columns. I'm going to take that 11th column and I'm going to break it down and I'm going to write a sex idea right here for my future. You know, I've had a piece of it there in that 11th column, but now I'm going to make a complete one out of it. So look at the directions. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm. And I think we looked at that up there in about the 4th column where it said, whom had we hurt? I'm going to be able to pull a list of names right there. Now, a lot of these people I'm not going to be able to make amends to because it would bring further harm. I still need to take a look at it. I still need to become willing, provided that I don't bring still more harm than doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, here's my prayer. I ask God what I should do about each specific matter that I've written about. The right answer is going to come to me if I want it. That's a promise in the book. God alone can judge my sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable. A lot of us has been through a lot of trauma when we were young whenever it comes to sexual abuse. I know I have, and I know a lot of other people that have too. And that is in no way our fault. I don't ever try to counsel anybody on anything like that when I lead them through this work. But the book does say this: counsel with person is often desirable. But we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. So we avoid hysterical thinking or advice. I avoid receiving it, and I also avoid giving it. I don't want to get into any of that. One of the first things I tell the guys whenever I first start sponsoring them is this: I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a clergyman. The only thing that I have to offer is the directions as they're laid out in the big book of how to recover. Suppose that we fall short of the chosen ideal, our sex ideal that we wrote about, and stumble. Does this mean that we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only the half truth. It depends on us and our motives. And for a long time, whenever I would read this part of the book, and I'd done this inventory many times over the 25 years I'd been in the other fellowship, I fell short of that idea every single time. I'd never returned to alcohol, and I never returned to drugs again, but I did return to lust and acting out over and over and over again. So, yeah, me and my motives. Now, if we are sorry for what we have done, and most of us are, we walk around with a lot of regret and a lot of remorse over the things that we've done. But it says, you know, if we have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe that we will have been forgiven and we will have learned our lesson. And this last time and coming back in over a year ago, I really believe that sentence applies more to me now than it ever has before. One of the things that my sponsor told me whenever I got my year in AA, he said, David, I believe that the sentence on page 70 is more relevant for you today than it ever has been again. He said, if you ever go back to that behavior again, I'm not sure if you will be able to stay sober. And I'm not just talking about in SA, in AA as well. And chances are that you will drink again. The guilt had almost took me out this time, and the fear and just all the despair that goes with it. But if we're sorry for what we've done, we have the honest desire to let God take us to better things. We believe we will have been forgiven and have learned our lesson. What a beautiful promise right there. But here's the other part of that. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experiences, and that is promise, absolute promise in the book. So to sum it up, here's some more prayer work. We earnestly pray for the right idea, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for strength to do the right thing. I've done this for a long time now. As a part of my daily prayers, I use this. I earnestly pray for the right idea, for guidance in each questionable situation. I pray for sanity. I pray for strength to do the right thing. But here's what I do if it does come back. It's given me something that I can do right here. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves harder into helping others. And if you're a part of this fellowship, I can promise you, if you got one day, you got one day longer than somebody else does. And so you have opportunity to help other people. We think of their needs and we work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. Remember that. We read about that in the third step prayer over there. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And that's my heartache and yours or anyone else's. Now, if I have been thorough about my personal inventory, not just this one, but the other two as well, the resentments, the fears, and now this, now, I've written down a lot, and you can bet I had 2 5-subject notebooks full. It says we have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We looked at that real closely on page 66 as we came back through this work. At that point, it talked about 7 different times on that page how anger and resentment was going to kill us if we didn't find a way to get free of it. We did the prayer work. We came through the work exactly as it was laid out in the book. It says we have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies. I have a different outlook on them today because of the work listed at the top of page 67 in that prayer work that we did coming through this work. For we look on them as sick people. Remember, it talked about this is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? Save me from being angry. Thy will be done. That instruction was on page 67 as well. It says we have listed the people that we have hurt by our conduct. Remember, that was the 4th column. Whom have we hurt? And now we're willing to straighten out the past if we can. That looks like some amends work that's going to be coming up. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. And we hope that you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. And that's beautiful. If you have already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, step 4, then you've made a good beginning. We're far from done. We're far from done. This is just the beginning. With that being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. And at this point in the work, I ask my guys, are you willing to go on? And for most of them, they absolutely are. I only had one guy in a little over 26 years of being around the program that would not move on with his 5th step after he did step 4. And he ended up drinking again. And I don't think he's ever made it back. Now, a lot of people I've talked to in the program over the years, when they'll be like in step 6 or step 7, they will make statements like, I've been working on my 6th step for some time now. And I would ask them, how long? How long have you been working on that? And they would say a month or 2 or 3 and sometimes even more. But the way that we're going to look at this, as it's laid out in the big book, when we finish with step 5 in 1 hour, we're going to be in step 9. And that's the way the book lays it out. Now, given I understand that we're going to practice this for a lifetime, always. But the instructions of working the steps in step 5, step 6, step 7, and step 8, 1 hour. And I think that we will take a close, in-depth look at that starting next week. We maybe have some time left, but I would love to hear your experience, strength, and hope on this. I know some of you have done this. Some of you that haven't, feel free to ask questions, because there's a lot of people on here, not just myself, that have done this work and are sober as a result of that today. So I know that we moved through that fairly quickly, but if there's anything that we left out or something you didn't understand, you want to ask a question, please feel free to do that, because it's just a beautiful process of the inventory. And without it, I cannot get sober. There's just no way. I've tried. That's my experience. It may not be yours, but it's mine. So anyway, Dennis, thank you for allowing me to share. I know that we have some time left here, but I'd really like to start with step 5 and working in the chapter into action with step 5 and next week moving forward. So thank you.